Have you ever felt like something is holding you back, but you can't quite put your finger on it? You wake up each day, go through the motions, and yet something inside tells you that there's more to life than what you're experiencing. What if I told you that the greatest threat to your happiness, success, and fulfillment might not come from external forces, but from within? Yes, you might be unknowingly sabotaging your own potential. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that could change the way you see yourself and your life. In this video, we're going to explore Nietzsche's powerful warning about 10 hidden disorders that have been quietly controlling our lives. These disorders aren't like the ones you find in a medical textbook. They're not something that will show up in a blood test or a scan. Instead, these disorders are deeply psychological, and they exist within all of us in varying degrees. They shape the way we think, act, and even feel, often without us realizing. But here's the catch. By understanding and recognizing these patterns, we can finally break free from the invisible forces that are silently holding us back. Have you ever found yourself procrastinating on important projects or lying to yourself about the state of your relationships? Or maybe you've spent countless hours scrolling through social media, comparing your life to others and feeling inadequate. These are not just harmless habits. They could be symptoms of these hidden disorders. But don't worry, recognizing them is the first step toward breaking free. And once you understand these patterns, you'll be able to take control of your life and start making meaningful changes. This video will not only help you understand these disorders, but also give you actionable steps to overcome them. By the end of this video, you'll have the tools to take charge of your destiny, live more authentically, and start making decisions that truly align with who you are. Trust me, this is going to be one of the most important videos you'll ever watch, and I guarantee that you won't want to miss a single minute of it. So grab your notebook, hit that play button, and let's embark on this transformative journey together. But before we dive in, don't forget to hit the like button if you find this video helpful. Share it with anyone who could benefit from these insights, and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, if you feel like you want to support the channel further, please consider sending a super thanks. Your contributions help keep this channel going strong and allow me to create even more valuable content just for you. Let's get started. In this video, Nietzsche's timeless philosophy serves as a critical reminder of the internal struggles that often go unnoticed in our lives. He suggests that the greatest threats to our existence are not external forces, but the hidden disorders within our own minds and behaviors. These disorders are not illnesses in the conventional sense. They are psychological patterns we adopt without awareness. However, despite their lack of visibility, they have a profound influence on our thoughts, emotions, and decisions. The video urges viewers to recognize these subtle patterns in their own lives before they lead to missed opportunities, wasted potential, and a life of regret. Nietzsche's view of human existence is deeply intertwined with the idea of the will to power, the inner force that drives us to grow, overcome obstacles, and shape our destinies. He believed that people are often unaware of the mental disorders they carry within them. These disorders, he suggests, can derail us from reaching our full potential. The video emphasizes that understanding and addressing these psychological patterns is essential to leading a fulfilling life. It is easy to fall into the trap of thinking that the problems in our lives are caused by external factors, society, relationships, the economy, or even luck. However, Nietzsche points out that many of these issues are self-inflicted, arising from our own attitudes, choices, and inner conflicts. These hidden disorders may not show up in a medical diagnosis or blood test, but they manifest in our daily lives through procrastination, fear, resentment, and self-deception. We often fail to see these disorders because they feel like a natural part of who we are. We excuse them as just the way we are, or our personality. But Nietzsche argues that we must confront these hidden patterns in order to free ourselves from their grip. The video lays out 10 such disorders, each of which reflects a different way our thoughts and behaviors can sabotage us. By examining these disorders, we can gain insight into the unseen forces shaping our decisions and take proactive steps to reclaim control of our lives. The first of these disorders is the self-deceiver. This disorder is perhaps the most dangerous because it involves lying to ourselves. Self-deception is a defense mechanism we use to avoid facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves or our situations. It's the voice inside our heads that says, "I'm fine," when we're clearly struggling, or "it doesn't matter," when it clearly does. The self-deceiver convinces themselves that their problems are not as bad as they seem, or that they will somehow fix themselves over time. Consider someone who stays in a toxic relationship despite knowing that it is causing them emotional harm. Instead of confronting the issue, they rationalize their actions, telling themselves that things will improve on their own or that they should stick it out for the sake of others. This avoidance is a form of self-deception, and it's a pattern that keeps them stuck. As Nietzsche would argue, the self-deceiver is trapped in their own lie, unable to break free and face reality. In the end, it's only through brutal honesty that change can occur. The second disorder discussed in the video is the meaningless drifter. Nietzsche believed that a life without purpose is a life at risk. The drifter lacks a clear direction or sense of meaning, living from day to day without any real goals or ambitions. They may go through the motions of daily life, work, eat, sleep without feeling connected to anything of significance. This can be particularly dangerous because it leads to a slow erosion of passion and motivation. For example, think of someone in their mid-30s who has been working at the same job for years, but has no real interest in their work. They get up each day, go through the motions, and come home exhausted but unfulfilled. There's no passion, no drive, just a cycle of repetition. Nietzsche would argue that the person who drifts without a purpose is vulnerable to external influences and manipulation. They lack the internal strength to navigate the challenges of life. In contrast, those who have a strong sense of why are better equipped to endure hardship because they are fighting for something meaningful. The third disorder, the chronic pleaser, speaks to the tendency to constantly seek approval from others. This disorder is particularly common in social contexts where there is a fear of rejection or conflict. The chronic pleaser is someone who is always saying yes, even when they want to say no. They prioritize others' needs over their own, often to the detriment of their well-being. This can lead to a sense of resentment and self-neglect. Imagine a person who is constantly volunteering for extra work at the office, despite being overwhelmed with their current workload. They say yes because they fear letting others down or disappointing their colleagues. Over time, this can lead to burnout, stress, and a feeling of being taken advantage of. The chronic pleaser loses touch with their own needs and desires and becomes trapped in a cycle of people-pleasing. Nietzsche would argue that in order to break free from this disorder, one must learn to set boundaries and honor their own truth, even if it means disappointing others. The fourth disorder is the comfort addict. This disorder is characterized by a desire to avoid discomfort at all costs. The comfort addict avoids risks and challenges, preferring to stay in familiar, safe situations. They shy away from new experiences, fearing failure or the unknown. While there is nothing wrong with seeking comfort occasionally, Nietzsche warns that living a life built entirely on comfort can lead to stagnation. Consider someone who has been in the same job for years, but is too afraid to apply for a promotion or start a new project. They are content with the status quo and avoid any situation that might require them to stretch beyond their current capabilities. While this might seem safe, it ultimately leads to a life of missed opportunities and unfulfilled potential. Nietzsche would argue that in order to grow, we must embrace discomfort and challenge ourselves. Only by stepping outside of our comfort zones can we discover our true potential. The fifth disorder is the bitter blamer. This disorder involves shifting responsibility for one's problems onto others, instead of accepting responsibility for their own actions. The bitter blamer looks outward for someone or something to blame. This could be the government, society, a boss, or even a spouse. By blaming others, the bitter blamer avoids confronting their own mistakes and shortcomings. However, Nietzsche warns that this pattern only serves to keep them trapped in a victim mentality. powerless to change their circumstances. For example, consider a person who blames their lack of success on their upbringing or the opportunities they didn't have. While it's true that external factors can influence our lives, constantly blaming others prevents us from taking control of our own fate. The bitter blamer's ego may be temporarily protected, but in the long run, they forfeit their ability to change their life. Nietzsche's solution is radical responsibility, owning your choices, your mistakes, and your ability to respond to life's challenges. These first 5 disorders represent ways in which our inner worlds shape our actions and decisions. They are patterns that may go unnoticed or be excused as part of who we are, but Nietzsche's philosophy encourages us to question these assumptions. By recognizing and confronting these hidden disorders, we begin the process of freeing ourselves from the mental prisons we've built. The journey toward personal transformation begins with awareness. And once we see these patterns for what they are, we can begin to take the necessary steps to break free. In the next part of the video, the final 5 disorders are introduced, each representing another way in which our thoughts, behaviors, and fears can sabotage our potential. These disorders include the resentful comparer, the eternal procrastinator, the cynical doubter, the perfectionist prisoner, and the passive bystander. Each of these patterns, though distinct, shares a common theme. They prevent us from fully engaging in life and achieving our goals. The resentful comparer lives in constant envy, comparing their achievements and life to others. This creates a sense of inadequacy, even when they have achieved success themselves. The eternal procrastinator delays action due to fear of failure, often telling themselves they'll start tomorrow. The cynical doubter rejects hope and optimism, believing that no effort will lead to success. The perfectionist prisoner is paralyzed by the fear of making mistakes, constantly trying to achieve an unattainable ideal. Finally, the passive bystander refuses to take action, waiting for others to make decisions for them and letting life pass them by. Each of these disorders has its own unique way of keeping us trapped in a cycle of inaction and dissatisfaction. Nietzsche's urgent message is clear. These disorders are not inevitable. They can be recognized and overcome. The key to transformation lies in confronting these patterns head-on, acknowledging their presence, and taking the first step toward change. By recognizing these 10 hidden disorders in our own lives, we can begin to take control of our destiny. Nietzsche's philosophy challenges us to step out of our comfort zones, take responsibility for our actions, and embrace the discomfort that comes with growth. Through this process, we can reclaim our power and live lives that are authentic, purposeful, and full of meaning. The first step, as Nietzsche would say, is to confront the truth, no matter how difficult it may be. Only by acknowledging the hidden patterns that shape our lives can we begin to break free from them and create the future we desire. The first 5 hidden disorders outlined by Nietzsche in the video revolve around internal struggles that, while not always visible, quietly shape our decisions and lives. These disorders are deeply psychological and arise from patterns of thought, behavior, and emotional responses that we develop as mechanisms to avoid discomfort. Let's delve into these disorders, explore why they matter, and provide practical examples to illustrate how they manifest in everyday life. The self-deceiver is perhaps the most dangerous of these disorders because it involves lying to oneself in order to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths. Self-deception is a psychological defense mechanism, a way of shielding ourselves from truths that might be too painful to acknowledge. For example, a person in a toxic relationship might convince themselves that things will improve with time, even though there is clear evidence to the contrary. They may ignore warning signs such as emotional manipulation, dishonesty, or neglect, telling themselves that their partner will change. This self-deception becomes a trap because it prevents the individual from taking action to improve their situation. Instead of addressing the reality of their relationship, they continue to justify their decision to stay, even though they are hurting. Over time, This lying to oneself can become a deeply ingrained habit, leading to years of emotional pain and missed opportunities for personal growth. As Nietzsche points out, the most dangerous lie is the one we tell ourselves, and the longer we believe it, the harder it becomes to escape its grasp. What makes the self-deceiver situation even more complex is that these lies are often comforting in the short term. The illusion of a better future, the hope that things will magically improve, provides temporary relief from confronting uncomfortable truths. However, the longer we remain in this state of self-deception, the more we risk our personal growth. Nietzsche argues that by facing the reality of our situation, by confronting the truth, we unlock the potential for change. If a person continues to lie to themselves, they will remain trapped in a false reality, unable to grow or move forward. In fact, it is only when we embrace brutal honesty about our situation, our flaws, and our fears that we can begin to make real changes in our lives. The second hidden disorder is the meaningless drifter, individuals who live their lives without any clear sense of direction or purpose. These are the people who wake up each day, go through the motions of work and daily routines, but feel unfulfilled and disconnected from their deeper passions. They are like ships without a rudder, floating aimlessly through life without any guiding force. Nietzsche believed that a life without purpose leads to emptiness. The drifter's life becomes an endless cycle of repetitive tasks, without any deeper meaning or fulfillment. A person might have a stable job, friends, and family, but if they lack a sense of purpose, they can feel like they are merely existing rather than truly living. Take, for instance, a person who has been in the same job for years but has no passion for the work they do. They may feel trapped in their daily routine, waking up to go through the same motions without any sense of excitement or motivation. They might envy others who have found a deeper sense of purpose or who seem to live their lives with passion, but they feel stuck and unsure of how to make a change. This is a perfect example of the meaningless drifter. Nietzsche's philosophy teaches that in order to feel alive, we must have something worth fighting for, something that gives our lives meaning. When we lose our sense of purpose, we become vulnerable to external influences and can be easily manipulated or controlled. Without a clear direction, we are tossed about by the waves of life, rather than steering our own course. The third disorder, the chronic pleaser, is the person who constantly seeks the approval of others, even at the cost of their own well-being. These individuals have a deep need to be liked and accepted by those around them, and as a result, they often neglect their own needs and desires. They may say yes to every request, agree to things they don't want to do, and avoid conflict at all costs. While this may make them appear friendly and agreeable on the surface, it ultimately leads to burnout and resentment. In relationships, this pattern can cause individuals to lose their sense of self. They may become so focused on pleasing others that they forget to care for themselves. Over time, this can lead to feelings of isolation and frustration, as the pleaser becomes increasingly disconnected from their own desires and values. For example, imagine an employee who is constantly volunteering for extra projects at work, even though they are already overwhelmed. They say yes to everything because they want to be seen as a team player and avoid disappointing their colleagues. However, over time, they start to feel resentful and burned out because their own needs are being ignored. The chronic pleaser finds it difficult to set boundaries and assert themselves, often sacrificing their own happiness to keep others happy. This disorder can lead to shallow, one-sided relationships, where the pleaser is constantly giving but rarely receiving. Nietzsche believed that in order to break free from this pattern, we must learn to say no and prioritize our own needs. By honoring our truth and setting boundaries, we can build more authentic relationships and reclaim our personal power. The comfort addict is another disorder that can limit personal growth. People who fall into this category avoid discomfort and risks, preferring the safety and ease of routine over the challenges and uncertainties of life. The comfort addict's life is built around avoiding pain, failure, and discomfort at all costs. They stick to what is familiar and predictable, avoiding situations that might push them outside their comfort zone. While seeking comfort is natural, when it becomes the driving force in our lives, it stifles our growth. Comfort can feel good in the short term, but it leads to stagnation in the long run. Consider a person who has always dreamed of changing careers, but is too afraid to take the leap. They stay in a job they dislike because it feels safe and familiar. They worry about the risks, losing their financial security, facing failure, or dealing with the uncertainty of a new career. As a result, they continue to stay in a job that doesn't inspire them, and their dreams of pursuing a more meaningful career fade into the background. Nietzsche's philosophy teaches us that growth requires discomfort. Only by stepping outside of our comfort zones can we experience real transformation. The comfort addict's fear of discomfort keeps them stuck in a life of mediocrity. By embracing challenge and taking risks, we unlock our true potential and discover strengths we didn't know we had. Finally, the bitter blamer is a person who refuses to take responsibility for their circumstances, instead blaming others or external factors for their misfortunes. This disorder is often rooted in a sense of helplessness and victimhood. The bitter blamer believes that the world is against them, and they constantly find reasons why life is unfair. They blame their failures on bad luck, poor upbringing, or the actions of others, rather than taking ownership of their own mistakes or shortcomings. This mindset prevents growth because it keeps the individual in a state of helplessness. Instead of looking inward to identify areas for self-improvement, they remain stuck in a cycle of blaming others for their problems. For instance, an athlete who is not performing well might blame their coach for not providing enough support or their teammates for not working hard enough. While it's true that external factors can play a role in our success or failure, constantly blaming others prevents the individual from taking responsibility for their own actions. Nietzsche believed that true empowerment comes from taking radical responsibility, owning our choices, our mistakes, and our ability to respond to life's challenges. The bitter blamer, by refusing to take responsibility, remains trapped in a cycle of frustration and inaction. By shifting our focus from blame to personal accountability, and the bitter blamer represent deeply ingrained patterns of thought and behavior that can undermine our potential and happiness. By recognizing these disorders in ourselves, we can begin the process of self-awareness and transformation. Nietzsche's philosophy challenges us to confront these patterns head-on, acknowledge the ways they are holding us back, and take proactive steps toward personal growth. Through honesty, responsibility, and a willingness to embrace discomfort, we can break free from these patterns and unlock our true potential. The next 5 hidden disorders revealed in Nietzsche's teachings speak to the internal obstacles that prevent us from fully engaging in life, from taking meaningful action, and from pursuing our deepest desires. These psychological patterns are often so ingrained that we may not even recognize them as disorders. Yet they quietly dictate our choices, shaping the path we take and ultimately impacting our happiness. The resentful comparer, the eternal procrastinator, the cynical doubter, the perfectionist prisoner, and the passive bystander each represent different forms of self-sabotage, trapping us in cycles of dissatisfaction, fear, and inaction. The resentful comparer is an individual who is constantly comparing themselves to others. In today's age of social media, this disorder is especially pervasive. We are bombarded with curated highlight reels of other people's lives, their vacations, relationships, accomplishments, and even their daily routines, leading us to measure our own lives against theirs. This constant comparison fosters feelings of inadequacy, jealousy, and resentment. Instead of appreciating what we have and focusing on our own growth, we get lost in the perceived success of others. Nietzsche believed that comparing ourselves to others is a dangerous trap because it takes us away from our authentic self and makes us focus on external validation rather than internal fulfillment. Take, for instance, a person who spends hours scrolling through Instagram, watching influencers living seemingly perfect lives. They begin to feel disheartened, questioning their own worth and wondering why their life doesn't match up to what they see on the screen. This can lead to a sense of envy and a lack of contentment with one's own achievements. The irony is that the more we compare ourselves to others, the more disconnected we become from our own identity. Nietzsche's wisdom here is clear. Stop comparing and start creating your own path. When we focus on being the best version of ourselves, rather than competing with others, we find fulfillment and peace. Every individual has their own journey, and comparison only robs us of the joy of ours. Next comes the eternal procrastinator, a disorder rooted in fear of failure, fear of judgment, or even fear of success. Procrastination is a pattern that plagues nearly everyone at some point. The person who constantly delays taking action because they feel overwhelmed or uncertain about how things will turn out. They might wait for the perfect moment to start a project, or worse, they may wait until everything is aligned perfectly before they take the first step. This fear-based delay can keep them stuck in a state of inaction, robbing them of the opportunity to grow, learn, and experience the joy that comes with taking action. Nietzsche would argue that procrastination is one of the most self-destructive habits because it leads to missed opportunities, unfulfilled dreams, and a stagnant life. Consider a writer who dreams of completing a novel but never starts. They constantly tell themselves they will begin when the time is right or once they have more free time. The truth is, they are paralyzed by the fear that their writing won't be perfect or that it won't be good enough to be published. So they never start at all. This procrastination leads to regret and frustration. Nietzsche would argue that the only way to overcome procrastination is to take action in perfect action. The first step is often the hardest, but it is also the most important. By starting, even if it's not perfect, we break the cycle of delay and begin moving toward our goals. It's through action that clarity comes, not through waiting for the right moment. The cynical doubter is another disorder that prevents us from moving forward in life. These individuals are skeptical of others' motives and dismiss opportunities because they believe that nothing will ever work out. They often criticize new ideas, thinking that all endeavors are destined for failure. Cynicism feels like wisdom, but in reality, it's a defense mechanism against vulnerability. People who are cynical have been hurt in the past, or they have grown jaded with life, and as a result, they shut themselves off from new experiences and relationships. They dismiss possibilities because they cannot bring themselves to hope or believe in others. An example of this could be someone who is offered a new business venture or a creative project, but immediately dismisses it because they believe it's doomed to fail. They say things like, "It's been tried before and didn't work," or "The world isn't ready for this kind of change." Their cynicism becomes a barrier to success, preventing them from building meaningful connections or exploring new opportunities. Nietzsche would argue that the cynic is trapped in their own fear, and only by daring to hope, to take risks, and to trust can they break free from this limiting mindset. The cynic's skepticism may seem rational, but it's ultimately a form of self-protection, a way to avoid disappointment. Embracing optimism, on the other hand, opens the door to growth, collaboration, and new possibilities. The perfectionist prisoner is a disorder characterized by an obsessive need to achieve perfection in everything we do. The perfectionist believes that if they don't get every detail right, they have failed. This mindset paralyzes them from taking action because they are afraid of making mistakes or not being able to meet their own high standards. Perfectionism is rooted in a fear of failure and a desire for control. It often leads to a cycle of frustration, as the individual never feels satisfied with their work, no matter how much effort they put into it. Imagine a student working on a term paper who spends hours on the introduction trying to make it perfect, only to find that they haven't even gotten to the body of the paper yet. They continue to tweak, adjust, and rewrite, but they never actually finish. This perfectionism prevents them from moving forward, and as the deadline approaches, they feel anxious and overwhelmed. Nietzsche believed that perfectionism stifles creativity because it discourages experimentation and risks. Instead of trying to make everything flawless, he argued that we should embrace the messiness of life, understanding that mistakes are a necessary part of growth. Perfectionism keeps us from taking risks and learning from our experiences. By accepting imperfection and focusing on progress instead of perfection, we can free ourselves from this mental trap. Lastly, the passive bystander is perhaps the most tragic of these disorders. This individual avoids taking action in their life, preferring to watch things happen rather than actively engage. They let life pass them by, always waiting for someone else to take the lead, or for external circumstances to dictate their actions. This passivity leads to a life of regret, as the person looks back and realizes that they've never truly participated in their own story. The passive bystander may have dreams and desires, but they are paralyzed by fear or indecision, and as a result, they miss out on opportunities to create their own destiny. A good example of the passive bystander is someone who watches their friends or colleagues take bold steps in their careers or personal lives, but never does anything themselves. They might sit on the sidelines of life, waiting for the perfect moment to get involved or to make a move. However, this moment never comes, and they remain stuck. Nietzsche believed that the greatest tragedy of life is not failure, but inaction, the refusal to engage, to take risks, and to live with purpose. The passive bystander forfeits their opportunity to grow, to experience, and to create a meaningful life. It's only when we actively engage in life, even when things are uncertain or uncomfortable, that we begin to uncover who we truly are. Each of these disorders, the resentful comparer, the eternal procrastinator, the cynical doubter, the perfectionist prisoner, and the passive bystander, represents a different form of self-sabotage that can prevent us from living authentically and fully. These disorders are often the result of fear, doubt, and a lack of self-trust. They keep us stuck in patterns of inaction, dissatisfaction, and frustration. However, Nietzsche's philosophy teaches us that these patterns can be broken. By recognizing them and confronting them head-on, we can reclaim our personal power and take charge of our lives. The key to transformation lies in taking action, embracing imperfection, and trusting ourselves enough to step into the unknown. Only then can we truly live the lives we were meant to lead. Nietzsche's philosophy is built upon the idea that self-realization is the ultimate goal of human existence. For Nietzsche, the pursuit of self-understanding is not a linear or easy path, but one that requires us to confront the darker and more uncomfortable aspects of ourselves. The hidden disorders discussed in the video are not just isolated flaws in our behavior, but rather symptoms of a deeper internal disconnect. They are patterns we have adopted over time, often unconsciously, to cope with the complexities and challenges of life. Nietzsche believed that by recognizing and confronting these disorders, we can begin the journey of self-transformation. The first crucial point Nietzsche makes is that these disorders are not flaws to be ashamed of, but opportunities for growth. When we recognize a pattern of behavior, such as procrastination or self-deception, we are being given a chance to examine our lives more honestly. The acknowledgement of these behaviors doesn't mean we are broken. Rather, it signals that we are ready to make a change. Nietzsche believed that many people avoid confronting their flaws because doing so would require them to face uncomfortable truths. This avoidance creates an internal disconnect, a gap between our conscious awareness and our unconscious motivations. By refusing to acknowledge our disorders, we allow them to control us, often without realizing it. They shape our choices, limit our potential, and trap us in cycles of dissatisfaction and unfulfillment. Self-realization, according to Nietzsche, is a process that begins with self-awareness. To truly understand who we are, we must first confront the patterns that shape our behavior. These patterns, such as comparing ourselves to others, seeking approval, or avoiding discomfort, are often unconscious, formed over years of social conditioning, childhood experiences, and internalized fears. When we become aware of these patterns, we can choose to break them. This is the essence of Nietzsche's philosophy. We are not merely victims of our circumstances or personalities. We have the power to shape our lives and our identities. But that power begins with the decision to face our own truths, no matter how difficult they may be. Let's take the example of a person who constantly procrastinates. For many, procrastination is a familiar pattern, often justified by the belief that they work better under pressure or that they simply need to get inspired before taking action. But when we examine procrastination more closely, it becomes clear that it is often rooted in fear of failure, fear of judgment, or even fear of success. Nietzsche would argue that procrastination is a form of self-deception. We tell ourselves that we will start working tomorrow, but deep down, we know that tomorrow will bring the same fears and doubts that prevent us from acting today. The act of procrastination is a coping mechanism, a way of avoiding the discomfort of starting something new or the anxiety of not measuring up. By confronting this pattern of procrastination with brutal honesty, we can begin to unravel its hold over us. The first step is to acknowledge the fear that lies beneath the procrastination. Once we identify the fear, we can choose to take small steps toward overcoming it. Nietzsche believed that by embracing discomfort and taking action in spite of our fears, we can begin to transform the patterns that limit us. Instead of waiting for the perfect moment to start, we can create that moment by taking imperfect action. This is where personal growth begins, by recognizing the hidden patterns that control us and choosing to act in a way that moves us toward the life we desire. Nietzsche also emphasizes that these disorders are symptoms of a deeper disconnect within ourselves. When we engage in self-deception, procrastination, or comparison, we are not living in alignment with our true selves. These disorders reflect an internal conflict, a gap between who we are and who we believe we should be. This disconnect is a source of immense suffering, as it creates a sense of inner fragmentation. We feel torn between different desires, fears, and expectations. And this fragmentation prevents us from living authentically. Take the example of the chronic pleaser, someone who constantly seeks approval from others at the expense of their own needs. This behavior is often rooted in a deep sense of insecurity and a fear of rejection. The chronic pleaser may feel that their worth is contingent upon the approval of others, leading them to suppress their own desires and prioritize the needs of those around them. This pattern reflects an internal disconnect between their true self and the persona they present to the world. The person may be aware of this dynamic on some level, but they may avoid confronting it because doing so would require them to face uncomfortable truths about their own self-worth. By acknowledging the disconnect, the chronic pleaser can begin the process of self-realization. The first step is to recognize that their worth does not depend on external validation. Once this realization sets in, they can begin to prioritize their own needs, set boundaries, and stop sacrificing themselves for the sake of pleasing others. Nietzsche would argue that this process is not easy, but it is necessary for personal growth. In fact, it is through confronting these difficult truths and choosing to act in a way that aligns with our authentic self that we experience the greatest growth. The meaningless drifter represents another example of the internal disconnect that Nietzsche refers to. This individual drifts through life without a clear sense of purpose, feeling disconnected from their deeper passions and desires. The drifter may have a stable job, a group of friends, and a routine, but they feel unfulfilled because they are not living in alignment with their true calling. Nietzsche believed that a life without purpose leads to existential boredom and dissatisfaction. The drifter may avoid pursuing their true passions because they fear failure, or they may simply lack the self-awareness to identify what they truly want out of life. For the drifter, the journey towards self-realization begins with the painful process of identifying what they truly desire. It requires introspection, self-honesty, and a willingness to let go of the security of the familiar. By confronting the emptiness of their life and acknowledging the deep desire for meaning and purpose, the drifter can begin to take action. Nietzsche would argue that purpose doesn't come from external sources, it must be created internally. This could mean pursuing a new career, starting a creative project, or dedicating oneself to a cause that resonates deeply with them. In other words, it requires the drifter to take ownership of their life and create the purpose they seek. Personal growth, according to Nietzsche, requires the courage to face the truth about ourselves and the willingness to make difficult changes. Each disorder presents an opportunity for growth, but only if we are willing to confront it honestly. When we acknowledge these patterns and choose to act in alignment with our true selves, we begin to move towards self-realization. This journey is not always comfortable or straightforward, but is the path to personal transformation. Take the example of the bitter blamer, someone who constantly shifts responsibility for their problems onto others. This pattern of behavior keeps the individual trapped in a victim mentality, unable to take control of their own fate. The bitter blamer may spend years blaming external circumstances for their lack of success or happiness. But Nietzsche would argue that this is a form of self-deception. The key to breaking free from this pattern is radical responsibility, taking ownership of our actions, our choices, and our ability to respond to life's challenges. When we stop blaming others, we regain control of our lives and empower ourselves to make meaningful changes. By embracing radical responsibility, we not only free ourselves from the grip of the bitter blamer, but also begin the process of self-realization. We stop seeing ourselves as victims of circumstance and start viewing ourselves as creators of our own destiny. This shift in perspective is transformative. It allows us to take ownership of our lives and move forward with purpose and clarity. Nietzsche's philosophy is ultimately about empowerment, the empowerment that comes from understanding ourselves deeply, acknowledging our internal patterns, and choosing to act in a way that aligns with our authentic desires. Each of these disorders represents an opportunity for growth, and it is through facing them head on that we regain control of our lives. Personal growth, for Nietzsche, is not about avoiding discomfort, but about embracing it. By confronting our fears, insecurities, and self-deceptions, we unlock the potential for transformation. The journey towards self-realization is not an easy one, but it is the path that leads to true freedom and fulfillment. Breaking free from the hidden disorders described earlier is not an easy feat, but it is possible. It starts with the recognition of the patterns that hold us back. Once we acknowledge these behaviors and thought processes, we can begin to make conscious efforts to change. To illustrate how this can work in real life, let's explore some examples of individuals who have confronted these disorders and taken action to transform their lives. These stories offer insight into how people have overcome their limitations and embraced change, offering hope and practical lessons for anyone struggling with these hidden disorders. Let's begin with the self-deceiver, a person who has spent years living in denial, especially in toxic relationships. Imagine a man named David. For years, David was in a relationship that was clearly unhealthy. He stayed with someone who belittled him, manipulated his emotions, and disregarded his needs. David continued to make excuses for his partner's behavior, convincing himself that things would improve over time. He told himself, "She's going through a tough time," or "maybe I'm the problem. I need to change." He would often ignore the signs of emotional manipulation, pretending that everything was fine, even though deep down, he knew something was wrong. David's journey of self-deception lasted for several years, during which time he suppressed his own desires, hopes, and dreams, all in the name of maintaining peace in the relationship. However, as time passed, he began to feel more and more disconnected from his true self. He realized that he had lost his sense of purpose and fulfillment, and it was directly tied to the toxic dynamic he had been accepting. One day, after a particularly painful argument, David finally reached a breaking point. He realized that his self-deception was destroying him. He could no longer deny the truth. He needed to break free. David made the difficult decision to end the relationship. This decision wasn't easy, and it took a great deal of courage to face the reality of his situation. However, once he embraced the truth and ended the toxic relationship, he began to feel a sense of relief and freedom that he hadn't felt in years. By confronting his self-deception, David reclaimed his life. He started focusing on his personal passions, spending more time with friends, and dedicating himself to activities that brought him joy. This story illustrates the importance of facing the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. By confronting self-deception, David found the fulfillment he had long been searching for. The next story involves the drifter, a person who has lived for years without any sense of direction or purpose. Meet Sarah. Sarah spent the first half of her life moving from one unfulfilling job to another. She had a degree in marketing, but had never been passionate about it. After graduating from college, Sarah took a series of corporate jobs, but she always felt a sense of emptiness. She didn't feel connected to her work, and there was no greater sense of purpose behind what she was doing. Day after day, she went through the motions, without any clear goals or passions driving her forward. Years passed, and Sarah found herself in her mid-30s, feeling lost and disconnected. She knew she wasn't happy, but she didn't know what to do about it. Her friends had families, successful careers, and clear goals. Meanwhile, Sarah felt like she was stuck in a rut, unsure of where she was headed. She spent hours browsing social media, watching other people living passionate lives, and wondering why she couldn't find the same drive. But then, one day, Sarah came across an article about environmental sustainability. Something about the topic sparked a fire within her, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose. Sarah decided to make a change. She took the leap and quit her corporate job to pursue a career in environmental advocacy. She began volunteering with local environmental organizations, learning everything she could about sustainability and climate change. Slowly but surely, Sarah's life began to transform. She found herself surrounded by like-minded individuals who shared her passion, and she felt fulfilled in a way she had never experienced before. Sarah's story is a powerful example of how it's possible to reignite passion and purpose, even after years of drifting. The key is to be open to new possibilities and to take action, even if it means stepping into the unknown. For the chronic pleaser, the journey to change often involves setting boundaries and learning to say no. Take the story of Laura, a high school teacher who was known for being the go-to person at her school. She took on extra assignments, helped with student events, and often stayed late to support colleagues. Laura was deeply committed to her students and loved teaching, but over time, the demands of her job began to take a toll on her physical and mental health. She was constantly exhausted, and her personal life was suffering. Despite this, she found it hard to say no. She feared letting people down and disappointing her colleagues and students. One day, Laura had a conversation with a fellow teacher who noticed how worn out she was. The teacher asked her, "When was the last time you did something for yourself?" This question made Laura pause. She realized that she had been so focused on pleasing others that she had neglected her own well-being. She also recognized that she had been saying yes to things that were not aligned with her values or goals. It was time to make a change. Laura started by setting clear boundaries at work. She decided that she would no longer take on additional responsibilities unless they were directly related to her core role as a teacher. She also began to schedule regular time for herself, whether it was taking a walk after school, reading for pleasure, or simply relaxing. At first, it was uncomfortable. She had to turn down requests from colleagues and resist the urge to overextend herself. But over time, Laura found that by setting boundaries, she was able to recharge and bring more energy and passion to her work. Her relationships with her students and colleagues improved, and her sense of balance was restored. By embracing self-care and setting boundaries, Laura broke free from the chronic pleaser disorder, allowing her to live a more fulfilling and balanced life. These stories demonstrate that confronting our hidden disorders is the first step toward transformation. It is only when we acknowledge the patterns that hold us back that we can begin to break free from them. The process of change requires action, often imperfect action and the willingness to step into discomfort. As Nietzsche argued, growth does not come from avoiding difficulties, but from embracing them. It requires self-honesty and a commitment to making small, consistent changes. For anyone struggling with these patterns, the first step is to recognize the disorder in their life. This may require introspection and self-reflection. Once you identify the disorder, the next step is to take action. This might involve confronting uncomfortable truths, like the need to end a toxic relationship or take on a new career path. It could also mean setting boundaries with others, learning to say no, and taking care of yourself. Change will not happen overnight, and there will likely be setbacks along the way. But by embracing the process and committing to growth, you can begin to break free from the patterns that have been holding you back. Procrastination, self-deception, people-pleasing, and lack of purpose are not fixed states. They are patterns of behavior that can be changed with awareness and action. The key to transformation lies in facing these disorders head-on, accepting imperfections, and taking steps, no matter how small, toward a more authentic and fulfilling life. It is through these actions, no matter how uncomfortable or imperfect, that we reclaim our power and begin to live the lives we were meant to lead. The journey toward transformation begins with awareness. Acknowledging the existence of these 10 hidden disorders is the first crucial step in reclaiming our lives from the patterns that have silently controlled us. Each disorder is a reflection of internal patterns, thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that have become ingrained over time. They often feel like parts of our identity, but in reality, they are mere coping mechanisms that, if left unchecked, prevent us from living authentically. Recognizing these patterns is not an admission of failure, but rather an invitation to engage in the process of change. By understanding how these disorders have shaped our lives, we can take the necessary steps to free ourselves and step into a more purposeful, authentic, and fulfilling existence. When we recognize that these disorders are not fixed traits, but patterns that can be changed, we unlock the possibility of transformation. For instance, procrastination doesn't have to define us. If we identify it as a pattern driven by fear or perfectionism, we can begin to reframe it and take small, actionable steps toward overcoming it. Similarly, self-deception, which often keeps us stuck in unhealthy situations, can be dismantled through brutal honesty. Once we stop lying to ourselves, we gain the clarity needed to take action and make meaningful changes. The chronic pleaser can learn to set boundaries and prioritize their own well-being. The drifter, who has been aimlessly floating through life, can reignite their passion by finding a cause that aligns with their values. Every disorder presents an opportunity for growth, and the recognition of these patterns is the first step toward unlocking the potential for change. Awareness is not enough. However, to truly transform our lives, we must take action. Change requires discomfort. It's not easy to confront our flaws, especially when they're so deeply embedded in our behavior and psyche. The discomfort of change is inevitable, but it is also the source of growth. The discomfort we experience when we confront our self-deception, set boundaries as chronic pleasers, or take risks as drifters is a sign that we are on the right path. Growth doesn't happen in the comfort zone. It happens when we challenge ourselves, take imperfect action, and face the discomfort of stepping into the unknown. Change requires courage, the courage to acknowledge where we are stuck, the courage to take that first step toward change, and the courage to keep going even when the process feels uncomfortable. One of the most powerful ways to begin this journey of transformation is to start small. Choose one disorder that resonates with you the most and begin by acknowledging it. For example, if you recognize yourself in the self-deceiver, take the first step by facing a painful truth about your life, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. This could mean admitting to yourself that you are in a toxic relationship or that you have been avoiding pursuing your dreams due to fear. By acknowledging the truth, you can begin to take action to break free from the patterns that have been holding you back. If you identify with the meaningless drifter, Start by identifying one area of your life where you can inject purpose. This could mean dedicating yourself to a cause, pursuing a hobby, or setting a goal that aligns with your values. The first step doesn't have to be grand. It just needs to be taken. The key is to take action, no matter how small, and keep moving forward. The journey of change is a process, and it's important to be patient with yourself. Transformation doesn't happen overnight. It requires consistent effort, self-compassion, and a willingness to embrace imperfections. For example, if you identify with the chronic pleaser, learning to set boundaries might feel uncomfortable at first. You may fear disappointing others, but over time, you'll learn that saying no is an act of self-care and an important step toward reclaiming your personal power. Similarly, the comfort addict might feel uneasy stepping outside their comfort zone. But this discomfort is where the magic happens. Every time you embrace discomfort and take action, you create momentum toward growth and transformation. The process of change also involves embracing failure. We live in a culture that often glorifies success and perfection, but in reality, failure is a necessary part of growth. Nietzsche believed that we must embrace the messiness of life and accept that mistakes and setbacks are part of the journey. By letting go of the need for perfection, we allow ourselves the freedom to experiment, learn, and grow. Each failure is an opportunity to learn more about ourselves and to adjust our approach. If we never fail, we never grow. The perfectionist, for example, may be paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake, but it's only by making mistakes and taking risks that they can truly discover their potential. Personal freedom comes from facing our fears and stepping into the discomfort of change. When we allow ourselves to acknowledge our disorders and take action, we free ourselves from the patterns that have kept us stuck. This freedom is not just about escaping negative patterns, it's about embracing the life we truly want to live. When we stop letting fear, self-doubt, and societal expectations dictate our actions, we create space for authenticity, purpose, and growth. Each step we take toward transformation brings us closer to the person we are meant to be. The process of change is also a lifelong journey. It's not about reaching some idealized version of ourselves, but about constantly striving for growth, self-awareness, and self-improvement. Nietzsche's philosophy is about embracing life's challenges and using them as opportunities for growth. It's about becoming the person you're meant to be, not the person others expect you to be. This journey requires courage, self-honesty, and a willingness to face discomfort head-on. Reflecting on the question, what is the first step I can take today to challenge the disorder holding me back, is a powerful way to begin the process of change. It forces us to confront the patterns that have been limiting us and take a small, intentional step toward transformation. The first step doesn't have to be perfect, it just needs to be taken. Over time, these small steps add up and the momentum of change builds. It's in these small, imperfect actions that true growth occurs. The key to personal freedom is not in waiting for the perfect moment, but in taking action now. Waiting for the right time or the perfect circumstances often leads to procrastination and stagnation. As Nietzsche said, the first step toward transformation is the hardest, but is also the most important. By taking that first step, we begin to break free from the chains of fear, self-doubt, and indecision. We step into our personal power and begin to create the life we desire. Ultimately, the process of change is about embracing who we truly are, acknowledging the patterns that have shaped our lives, and taking action to create the life we want. It's about becoming more authentic, more intentional, and more free. The journey is not easy, but it is worth it. As you take that first step, remember that growth comes from action, not from waiting. Embrace the discomfort, confront the fear, and take that small step toward change today. The transformation you seek is already within you, just waiting to be unleashed. And there you have it, 10 hidden disorders that could be silently sabotaging your happiness and success. It's not easy to admit, but recognizing these patterns within ourselves is the first step toward real, lasting change. The good news is once you acknowledge these disorders, you can begin the journey of transformation. Whether it's overcoming procrastination, breaking free from self-deception, or setting boundaries to avoid burnout, every single disorder represents an opportunity for growth. Think about it. How different would your life be if you could finally let go of these hidden forces and live a life that truly aligns with who you are? The key to personal freedom is in recognizing these disorders and taking action no matter how uncomfortable it may be. Remember, transformation doesn't happen overnight, but every small step you take brings you closer to the person you're meant to become. So, take that first step today. Acknowledge the disorder that's holding you back and commit to breaking free from it. As you move forward, don't forget that self-compassion and honesty are crucial in this journey. It's okay to fail, to make mistakes, and to take imperfect action. Growth comes from those moments of discomfort and challenge. But as Nietzsche once said, he who fights with monsters should be careful, lest he thereby become a monster. By confronting your inner monsters, your fears, your insecurities, your self-deceptions, you free yourself to become the best version of yourself. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these hidden disorders do you think has been holding you back the most? What's the first step you can take today to begin overcoming it? Leave a comment below and let's start a conversation. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. We're all in this together, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. If you found this video valuable, please make sure to hit that like button, share it with your friends or family who could benefit, and subscribe to the channel for more life-changing content. Also, if you feel called to support the channel, don't forget to send a super thanks. Your support helps me continue to create videos like this and bring more powerful content to you. Thanks so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Let's keep growing together.